We're back in Genesis tonight, and we're going to be in Genesis chapter 32. Jacob is trying to go home. Jacob has left Laban, and Rachel has stolen the idols or the blessings, the household blessings of idols, or idols of blessings, and it's caused a rift in the family, and there's been a boundary set, and Jacob can't go back. He only can go forward. To go back and cross the boundary that has been set is to cause a war. And so he travels forward. And so there's a lot of concern on Jacob's part. What is he going to do? And so Jacob has a plan, and we're going to look at the plan, and we're going to see how his plan begins to unfold. You know, when you are young and do things sometimes you ought not to, you always like to have somebody big with you, right? If you're going to get in trouble, Gunner, who you want with you? Cal, if you get in trouble, who you want with you? You don't want Gunner, do you? Well, you know, that's just the way it is. You watch these movies, and I watched Crocodile Dundee. Y'all ever watch Crocodile Dundee? And it's the one where he goes back to Australia, and these gangsters are after him, and they're running. These two guys are running. This little guy sitting there by the fire. And I can't remember what he calls the guy, but he says something like, I got a boink with me. And he said, you're going to need more than a boink. What's a boink? He turns around and he said, I'm the boink. And he's like a 6'8", 260-pound guy. And he hits him. Knocks him out. Well, that's kind of what Jacob has. But Jacob doesn't realize it. Look at verse 1 of chapter 32. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp, and he called the name of it the double camp. Now, it's the Hebrew name there, Mahanaim. If I said it right, and I'm not sure I said it right. It's Hebrew. It's not pronounced in the English. To pronounce it, you'd have to know Hebrew. You don't pronounce it in the English vocabulary. But it means the double camp. So it tells us a couple of things when you read those first two verses. First of all, when you read verse 1, Jacob's on his way, and the angels, and it's plural, right? It has an S on the angels, so we know it's plural. So there's numerous angels. And then you come to verse 2, and he says this is God's camp, and he called it a double camp. That's what the word means. And so there is a double camp. And so what this tells us is that on his right hand and his left hand, there are groups of angels. And they're camping on each side of his camp. As he travels, they travel on each side of his camp. And so he has these angels that are going with him. You would think, and it would seem to the mind, that he should know that God's protection is with him. I mean, that's pretty good stuff, isn't it? He's traveling, he looks, he sees angels. There's a double camp of them, two sides of them. Multiple angels. And we know that angels are very powerful. So we come to verse 3, and we'll call this Jacob's plan. Verses 3 through 6. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded him, saying, speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have sojourneyed with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants that I have sent to tell my Lord, that I may find favor in your sight. Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is also coming to meet you with 400 men are with him. So here's Jacob's plan. I'll just show my brother Esau how wealthy I am. I'll show him how many flocks I have. I'll show him how many donkeys I have. I'll show him how many camels I have. I'll show him how many cattle, how many sheep I have. I'll show him how many servants I have, male and female, and he will respect me because I am wealthy. There's something wrong with that, isn't it? Because wealth doesn't bring respect. The Bible tells us that the love of money is actually the root of what? All evil. So he sends messengers. Here's his plan. I'm going to send these messengers. They'll tell Esau what all I have, and it's a great plan. But the messengers come back, and they throw a wrench into his plan when they come with a message that says Esau's coming. It reminds me of a song. Y'all know, well, you know who Three Dog Night is? No. Does anybody here know who the row in the back of yard? Yeah. There's a song. These old songs. There's one called Eli's Coming. Y'all ever heard that song? Y'all know how? If I sing it, you still won't remember it. Well, Eli's coming. Okay? And it goes, you know how it goes, right? Why would you do me that way? Susan knows it. Sing it, Susan. And so Eli's coming. Well, Esau's coming. And he's coming with 400 men. Now, Jacob is a brave soul. He's rich. He's got a lot of donkeys and camels and sheep and cattle and goats and servants, but he's not really brave. It reminds me of a guy that was hiding in a wine press. And God goes to him and says, "You're a mighty man of valor." And Gideon looks around to see who he's talking to, because he's hiding in a wine press. So that was Jacob's plan. And it's, we never go to the Lord with our plans until our plans don't work out. Have y'all realized that by now? Most of the time, we try to do things ourselves. We handle our problems ourselves. And then when they don't work out, we say, oh, well, let's see what God wants us to do. So we come to verse 7. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. There it is. And he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 companies. And he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. Well, that sounds pretty good. Then Jacob said, verse 9, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and all the truth which you have shown your servant, for I crossed over the Jordan with my staff, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Let's stop right there. Here is Jacob's prayer. And he begins to take matters into his own hand again. He divides the group up. He puts the ladies apart with their children. And he says, well, if they attack one group, then the other group will get away, and he's in the back, this brave soul. And if he attacks this group over here will get away, and I'll go with them. If he attacks this group will get away, and I'll go with them. What has he forgotten? Verse 1 and 2. The angels. You go back to verse 1 and 2. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him, and he saw them, and they're in two camps. He has a host of angels. And one angel, one night, killed 135 soldiers. 1,000 soldiers. What has he got to fear if he has faith? What has he got to fear if he'll just trust the Lord? He knows they're there, and yet he doesn't have faith in God. You remember when he slept on the stone and he saw the ladder? He made a covenant, and it was his covenant. God, you got to do this and this and this and this, and if you do all this, then I'll do this. It doesn't work that way. It's the same type of covenant we make when we say, Lord, you let me go to the casino and win $1 million, and I'll give half of it to the church. Something wrong. And he begins to call on God's name, and he begins to remind God of what you said. But the problem is Jacob has not kept his part of the deal. But we expect God to keep his part. Regardless of what we do, God must keep his part. We can live like hell, if you will, and God still has to keep his part. We don't have to go to church, but God still has to let us go to heaven. We don't have to give to the church, but God still has to let us go to heaven. We don't have to work for the kingdom of God, but God, you still have to let us go to heaven. But the problem is it really doesn't work that way. Because if you're going to heaven, you're going to do what God has commanded you to do. You're going to go to church. You're going to give to church. You're going to minister in the world that we live in. Because God has saved your soul. So he says, deliver me. Just deliver me, and I'll do good, and I will multiply. Just deliver me. Then notice verse 13. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau his brother. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams. That's a pretty good crowd of animals. 30 milk camels and their coats, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 foals. Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass over before me and put some distance between successive droves. Verse 17, then he commanded the first one, saying, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? And where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, they are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he also is behind us. So he commanded the second and the third, and all who followed the drove, saying, in this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And also say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. Jacob revised his plan. He said, now I'm not going to brag, I'm going to buy him off. I'm going to hostage this thing out. I'm going to give him what he, maybe he'll just spare my life if I've got enough stuff that he'll take and he'll let me live. And so that's his plan. He gives the gifts, he tells them what to say, and he sends 3 waves of these gifts. A fortune. A fortune. Then Jacob, in verse 24, was left alone, and a man. You see that? In your translation, if you have a new translation, the man should be capitalized. Angel of the Lord should be capitalized because it's God. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Think about that. We think coming to heaven is an easy trip. We think about getting saved as being something that's just haphazard and easy. But all through the Scriptures is noted as a fight, as a pressing in, as a striving for. And here is Jacob trying to save his soul, trying to save his life. And it is a fight. He fights with God. He wrestles with God. And he's injured in the wrestling. He's changed. And God asked him, what's your name? Well, I'm Jacob. No, Jacob's dead, is what he's saying. Jacob is dead, just like in the waters of baptism. You're buried in death to sin, and you rise out of the water a new person. And now Jacob comes out of the water, and he's no longer Jacob, he's now Israel or Israel. Changed. A new creature with a new name. Then Jacob asked him in verse 29, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask me or ask about my name? And he blessed him there. Verse 29 is a unique verse. Jacob asked him, saying, tell me your name. And he says, and in the Hebrew construction, it's like this. Are you that ignorant? God asked Israel now, are you so ignorant that you don't know who I am? And I've studied that verse. I studied that verse for years before I realized it is what we are. We become saved people, but most of the time when God speaks to us, we don't recognize who He is. We're not sure who God is, even though we're His children, because we have not and will not and never will spend enough time trying to find His face. We will never recognize God, so we have to ask Him, who are you? Who are you? And what God is doing to Jacob is making him feel ashamed. Because God's saying, basically, I'm the guy that when you laid your head down on the stone that I created, I gave you the vision of the ladder, and I told you that I was going to minister to you. I am the guy that sent the angels on the right and the left of you. I am the guy that's here that blessed you, that touched your hip. You ought to know who I am. Why do you ask, who are you? But we still ask. We have a Bible. And there's very few people in here under the age of 40. A couple in the back. Well, it's more than a couple. And 3 on the front. Is that about it? And the 2 sisters, y'all are under 40. just trying to be nice. Scratch my head. That's Judy and Robbie. Why don't we know God when He speaks to us? Why don't we recognize the work of God when we see it? Because we're not in the Word like we ought to be. What is your name? Who are you? Are you so ignorant you don't know my name? But notice this. And he went on to bless him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peninnah. For I've seen God face to face. He recognized him at that point. And my life has been preserved. Don't you like that word preserved? You know what it makes me think of? Strawberries. Because you take those strawberries and you cut them up and you make the jam and you put them in a jar and you keep them. And that's what God does. He preserves us. For how long? Forever and ever and ever. I have figs. Y'all know what figs are? I don't know, how old are those figs, Susan? I can pop the top on them. And my brother has some my mama made, and she died in 92. And you can pop the top on them, and they'll still be good. Because they're preserved. And we'll still be good when we get to heaven because God has preserved us. Just as he crossed over, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. You know what I call that? Israel's change. When you become a Christian, these last couple of verses, there should be a change in your life that people notice. He walks over. You know, when I read that verse, you know who I think about? Do y'all know who the real McCoys are? Do y'all know? Mr. Jerry, you know who the real McCoy? Y'all know who Grandpa is? Y'all know how he walked? Now, if you're under 40, you don't know. But y'all know, right? Carrie, you know remember how old Grandpa, he'd walk with that? Man, he'd get to walk. He'd be limping. And that's how I picture Israel walking. And he'd walk, man, he'd be walking, and he'd get to running. He'd really be limping. And you could see that he had that limp. And here comes Jacob, and his families are there. Don't you know they noticed that limp? It's visible. It is a visible change in Israel. From Jacob to Israel, there's something different that you can see. And from a lost person to a saved person, there is something visible that must be seen in your life. Because if it's not seen, it's not real. Now think about that. If there's nothing real in your life, then there's not going to be any change. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel will not eat the sinew that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he, does it say he in y'all's Bible? Is the he capitalized? Who does that mean? God. Because God, touched it. And there's a song. What's the song go? Oh, he touched me. And if he touches you, it changes you. And it makes a difference in your life. And we'll stop right there. All right. Prayer list.